I'm David Kleeman. I'm the president of the American Center for Children and Media, and putting on this breakfast briefing for you this morning, or I'm tempted to say that this is a reading of Our Town.
Stage manager. You're the stage.
I'm the stage manager, exactly. But I think it will work well for this purpose. Just a very brief introduction to the American Center for Children and Media for those of you who haven't been to our events before. We serve two functions in the industry. One is as an executive roundtable, bringing together industry leaders to look at what's going on around the world and around the country, what research is saying about the relationship between children and media, what some of the issues are that are percolating out there, and help lead the industry to good choices, good decisions. The other is as a creative professional development center for the industry. So putting on events that bring together the people who on a day-to-day basis are making the media that children are consuming, and bring them new ideas, bring them opportunities to exchange ideas, expertise, experiences. We are always looking for great ideas for events that we can put on, ways to bring people together, speakers who you would love to get a chance to hear, things that you feel would help you do your jobs even better. So please make sure to get in touch with me. We are finally, after years of back and forth, up and running with our website at centerforchildrenandmedia.org. And you'll find information about some of the events we put on there, some papers that I think you'll be interested to read. And today's discussion actually will be linked there. We are videotaping it, and it will be up online as soon as we can get it there. Scott Traylor has very graciously agreed to film it, digitize it, and get it up online. And Olivia Beasley from
Women and Children Media
is our videographer today. And then the other thing that I'm really happy to announce is that we've just agreed with 13 WNET to bring our Pre-Jeunesse screening back to their studios in the fall. I know that's a favorite for a lot of people with kids TV from around the world. So as soon as we can set a date, I've just come back from the International Festival about 2-3 weeks ago. There's a lot of really good and really interesting and really controversial programming. So I'm looking forward to presenting that for you. Let me also say that the center is guided and supported by the industry, that our board of governors and our support comes from companies like Nickelodeon, Disney, Cartoon, Discovery, Sesame Workshop, Kid Entertainment. I know I'm forgetting people, Scholastic, and it's really great to see people from a number of our board companies represented here today in the audience, PBS and CPB as well. So today's event, there are benefits to controversy sometimes, and one of those benefits is that it draws attention. It prompts attention to something. So we've been through a couple of years of a little back and forth about preschoolers and media, about how young is appropriate, about what's appropriate at what age. And I think there are two things about this audience. One is clearly preschoolers are the most vulnerable audience out there. They're the least able to speak for themselves when it comes to the media that we're providing them. They absolutely have preferences, they absolutely benefit from a lot of things, but they're the least able to voice their own preferences. At the same time, they are probably the best served audience right now by children's media. We are in just a real golden age of preschool television in particular, with just a range of programs that are serving all their developmental needs in a variety of ways, and that are just so much fun to watch at the same time. So we're in this interesting balance of times in preschool media. But the nice thing is that, well, and the debate that's been around it at times has shed more heat, I think, than light. So it's been really good in the last year to see a good bit of light coming to this discussion, especially through two books that were written by people who came to this question from very similar places. Some of you may have been at our breakfast briefing last year with Lisa Guernsey, who wrote Into the Minds of Babes. And today we present Dade Hayes, the author of Anytime Playdate. Both these books came from people who were watching their own children using media, whether it's television or digital media, and wondering about what's going on behind the scenes, both in their own children's minds and also in the industry that's creating the media for them. Lisa took a very sort of research, looking at the research, what it says about the relationship between children and media. And Dave took a very different approach that I find absolutely fascinating, which is to get behind the scenes of how media is made, the development process, the research process, and really talk to the people who are creating it on a day-to-day basis, find out how they connect with their audiences and how they do their creative work. It's a book Anytime Playdate is a book that is going to have appeal not just for industry, but also I think for parents who are looking for the reassurance that they're going to find in this book that there is a lot of thought that goes into the creation of preschool media. They'll see the depth that is behind the programming that their kids are watching, and they'll hear it not just from an industry expert, which Dade is as an editor at Variety, but also as another parent who's trying to manage media in his children's lives. So, as I said, Dade Hayes is an editor at Variety and author of Anytime Playdate. And to interview him today, I'm really thrilled to have Scott Traylor, who's the CEO and chief kid of 360 Kid in Boston. Scott and I kept bumping into each other at various conferences around the country, and listening to him speak and ask questions and just see where he goes tells me that he is someone who's fascinated by the full umbrella of children's media. 360 Kid is primarily a software development company, but Scott looks at the really big picture. He's involved with educational publishers, he's involved with game creation, with digital media, with television. So it's someone who brings a very broad view to our industry. And with that, I'm going to do what I like to do best, which is sit down and listen to two fascinating people talk.
Thank you very much, David. Before I get started, I just want to let you all know, share something with you. For me today, it's Bring Your Family to Work Day, and maybe some of you met my family members before we started today. And in going over my notes with my daughter, she gave me a really good piece of advice. And she said, it's a good idea to start with your name. So I'm going to let you know, my name is Scott Traylor, and as David said, I am CEO and Chief Kid of 360 Kid, a company that specializes in content and technology products for children. And I really enjoyed reading your book, Dave, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you started your journey and starting to write your book.
It's amazing to think that 4 years ago I was on the living room floor, kind of just opening this window onto this vast kind of playground of content. And here we are today, and I have to say it's really, I'm honored and really humbled to be in front of this kind of an audience, because I hope that today will be not just a dialogue between the two of us, but that everybody can lend their expertise to the conversation, as several of you have during my research. But it is a pretty amazing journey that I've been on. I mean, I think David did, capture what I was really setting out to do, which is to really examine who makes this stuff. I mean, that was what I was asking myself when I was there with my daughter, 6:15 in the morning. A lot of parents kind of know that feeling, and I was sharing Sesame Street with her and other things, and but then I sort of stepped back and said, there's so much of it. Where does it come from, and who are these people? You are those people. And I really have to say, I know it sounds awfully Pollyanna, but in the interviews I've been lucky enough to do, to promote the book, everybody says, well, what really surprised you when you got into this? As if, I'm going to be revealing the lead paint that they're pouring into. They're really waiting for me to sort of serve up a kind of a gotcha. And I've been saying that the thing that really surprised me was the commitment to quality, and the fact that these things go years through the process. I mean, I followed a show at Nickelodeon, Nick Jr., called Kai-lan. 4 years that's taken from concept to air date. And so they don't just sort of stitch these things together and throw them on the air by and large. And that really impressed me, but then I wanted to kind of go further.
Sure. Well, it's great that you bring that up, because one of kind of an ongoing theme throughout the book is the development of the show Kai-lan. And you sound like you've had great access to the show creators and developers and writers and artists every step of the way. Can you talk a little bit about that journey with them, and what were some of the surprises
Yeah, my very first introduction to the show, I was talking to, I knew I wanted to focus on Nickelodeon, because it's actually surprising to me how little consideration it's gotten. It certainly has an amazing footprint just as a contemporary brand. I mean, it's probably one of the most powerful brands, bar none. But nobody's really kind of examined it in terms of how it got there, how it operates, etc. So I knew Nickelodeon was going to be a very central element in the book. And so I started talking to them, and they said, well, we've got this great show, and we just started the dialogue. And then I went out to Burbank, to the studio, and then to a focus group. My very first kind of entree was actually a focus group that they were doing in Glendale at a preschool. I didn't even know that that's the protocol, that that's what I mean, I was just plunged into this this world, and it was just, I kind of, my daughter was in preschool, I knew that age so well. I was sort of conversant in it in a kind of subconscious way. So I was just locked in from the moment I was allowed to just be a fly on the wall. And just to kind of see those initial elements, I think many people here have that experience creatively, which must be amazing. I've actually seen kids, it's a little bit like writing a book and actually people are finally reading it. Oh, that's what they're supposed to do. So kids are actually responding to the show, and it's amazing how much they were able to kind of, it was a very elastic show in terms of how much Chinese the kids would accept, how much of the cultural element they would accept. So right from those early kind of moments, I knew that I was very interested in telling that story. And I think they were very, they wanted that message to get out there. And so it was a relatively easy back and forth in terms of, getting to know. And thankfully, they were all just really great people, great individuals to deal with.
It's kind of rare to get that behind-the-scenes look and unrestricted access like you had through the development of that show. You were brought in pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I mean, they had the full. This was after they had created the shorts, and they had the full season order. But it was, before they even had any of the early, the design, the art was just taking shape. I mean, Karen Chow had done these sketches, so it was basically her own vision of what it should be, and then she had to then team up with this international crew to actually bring that to life. So I was there pretty early on, not at the very, very earliest stage, but I was able to kind of see it. I mean, the show got delayed, I think, 4 times while I was gone, and so that gives you an idea.
Sure. One interesting additional theme throughout your book is you kind of look at the academic research as well as the marketing research related to a show's development. And you were brought into many different focus groups and testing efforts for this new Nickelodeon show, as well as you comment on that effort of a lot of other shows as well. What did you see? What did you learn?
Well, what's interesting is that I consider it, I'd be interested in everybody's thoughts on this, but I really consider it kind of a double helix, where you have this kind of corporate, sounds like maybe not quite the right word, but you have an institution that's trying to do research in the way that any marketer does research. You test it on the audience. So you have that operation, but you also have many of those people in the field and doing that research have very, very estimable credentials from the academic world, and they're reading the latest research and trading observations with academic researchers. So there's kind of this interesting back and forth, and they both kind of inform the other, I would say. That basically the products that get created then get filtered through the process in academia, and then vice versa. The findings from academia find their way into the methods of people researching. Mm-hmm. And I was just pretty amazed at the resonance. I mean, you can't really look at that many other fields. I mean, I've looked around entertainment, so that's admittedly just one sector of our economy. But I mean, elsewhere in entertainment, I kept telling people, movies at prime time, it doesn't really work like this, you know. I would say, well, this is how it is when they test a movie. Is it like this? And, you know, I had to sort of learn quickly that it was a very, very different process, much more deliberate, much more about testing became a different word to me. In movies, there's kind of, I think, testing and focus grouping. It's almost like a four-letter word. It's something where something is wrong, or it's a perversion of the process. The opposite is true, I would say, with preschool, where you're testing to make sure that the message is actually getting through, and that you're being effective, which will, of course, help your objectives commercially, but it's also about reaching that audience. And as David said, it's a very, very vulnerable group.
Mm-hmm. No, certainly special consideration goes into many products for our youngest viewers and users, and there's certainly a lot of consideration with academic research, but also, you know, at times, since so many dollars are at stake on a new product, that the marketing side of research plays a strong part as well. You know, making sure, you know, are we challenging a child too much or too little? You know, is the languaging incorrect?
Right.
What will help the show succeed beyond just the child succeed,
right,
but the learning goals of the show?
I mean, I do think it's important to also say that what I did discover was a spectrum, you know, where there is, you know, and it was funny, I know Rosemary is here from Sesame Workshop, everybody pointed to CTW and Sesame as kind of, you know, every other company was saying, boy, I wish we could be that thorough. You know, we may not be at that level, but that's really our ideal. But it is a spectrum where you have, you know, very fastidious, meticulous, thoughtful, responsible, you know, R&D, if you will, on this end. And it does range, you know, I mean, if people look through the book, they'll see others who really have this kind of shoe leather approach where it's just about talking to kids and parents, intuiting, they use their gut more than they do any kind of attention scores or feedback that they're getting that fits into any kind of you know, research model.
That's great you touch on that too, that, and I'll come back to research in a moment. In your book, there's a fabulous chapter about Julie Clark, the founder of the Baby Einstein videos. And I was really fascinated by your conversations with her and her approach to making a product for very young children. And I found it amazing, the contrast of how the development of that product was with many other products, on-air products for preschoolers, especially this Kai-lan show with Nickelodeon. Could you talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between those two approaches?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a pretty stark contrast. I mean, I remember asking her, kind of with an assumption behind my question, you know, so what kind of focus grouping did you do? I mean, you must have done some kind of research. And she said no. I mean, she studied a little bit of psychology when she was an undergrad at Michigan State. She was a teacher for a short time, but not at a preschool level, you know, high school. She had a baby at home, and she had read an article in Newsweek magazine about the brain and about, it was a cover package about sort of the human brain, and I think maybe child development and brain development of babies and toddlers was an element of that. So she had basically read a consumer magazine and just whipped up this video. And it, you know, I kind of went back and forth about that and comparing it to the years of research that go into other things. And, you know, personally in my household, and I think Julie Clark is a perfectly amiable, you know, kind-hearted woman. She was very generous with her time and thoughts with me. I haven't heard from her since the book came out, but we may not be pals anymore, I don't know. But I gave her more of a say, I think, than a lot of other writers have, and I tried to kind of get her point of view out there, for good or for ill. But, I mean, you know, I wrestled with that question of what results from it, because there are some things that maybe shouldn't be as they just don't make it through. They're somehow, the ideas and the creative spirit is too fragile to kind of survive the process. One could argue. Mm-hmm. And that maybe it is going with the gut can pay dividends. I will say in our household, we're just not a baby Einstein household.
Sure.
And I think some of the comments I got along the way as I was doing my reporting and my research about the number of cuts, about the pacing and the
formal features of show development.
Yes, I don't think that phrase would really apply to that line of videos, but she somehow had a sense of what other moms were like. So it's an amazing modern American tale.
No, it is, and if you haven't read the book yet, I mean, just even that chapter alone, I think was really well worth reading. But you do touch on other shows in the past that weren't as, maybe they were developed more from the gut. Kukla, Fran and Ollie, for example, or maybe Captain Kangaroo. Nowadays, when new shows are made, I mean, there are big dollars involved. There are high stakes.
Right.
With any new product that's greenlit. So I wonder, are the days of creating content for children but working from your gut, the days have long gone by?
Yeah, and moreover, is it possible to work from the gut and also sort of be more purely focused on entertainment than on education? Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure that that's really possible. I mean, there was that age, and I actually have to say I grew up on Captain Kangaroo and never had seen Kukla, Fran and Ollie until I went to the Paley Center and did a lot of viewing of some of their old shows. And there is something kind of magical about just they really do kind of connect back, if you really think about our storytelling traditions with, puppet theater and, all those different forms of children's entertainment. Mm-hmm. And there is merit to that.
Yeah.
Now, we've had periods in our popular culture, the 80s being probably the most glaring example, where things shifted too much to the kind of, empty calories, high sugar, just pure entertainment of, toy tie-in type of shows. Mm-hmm. So, finding some balance, I can say with authority as a parent, I want some mix, of both.
Certainly. Well, there's two branches there on your comment that I'm going to follow up with. One related to education and children's programming, and two on the toy side of the business. But on the education side, you touch on it briefly. It's not. There's not a lot of content on this in your book, but you mentioned a show by Ann Wood's company Ragdoll in the UK called In the Night Garden, I believe it is. And for those of you unfamiliar with it, it's an absolutely beautiful show. I mean, as an adult, it's aesthetically beautiful. Yeah. And there's a real contrast about the way that show was made and how it's one of the most popular shows in the UK right now, and how it won't get played here in the US.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that was one of the most profound. She is probably the single most fascinating person, and many of you, I think, know. And I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I was so thrilled that she could open up a little time in her schedule, and we met in London. I unfortunately didn't have time to go out to Stratford, and really, that Sunday would be an amazing experience. But just her point of view, her life experience is just so unique. I mean, she does occupy this very idiosyncratic place on that spectrum I mentioned earlier of, she doesn't really do it by the book. I mean, she actually hates the term research. She said, I don't want to call it research. It sounds like a bunch of people in lab coats walking around with, clipboards. She prefers the term observation. She has these, there's a center that she started. It's affiliated with her company with, it's essentially like I guess kind of a glorified daycare center. Maybe some people have been there and offer a more precise description, but it's basically a place where she's able to have children there with their parents and just watch them play and interact with each other. And in the Night Guard, as you said, a beautifully executed show on a completely unlikely premise, which is about sleep and dreams. And it's so amazing because she says that she drew from the comments and the just what bubbled to the surface during her observation of kids, that some of them were having trouble sleeping, and I guess she felt post 9/11 there was more kind of anxiety about the world, that children as young as 2 and 3, were somehow, it was dawning on them that the world was not a completely safe, secure place. That there was a way that could be at risk.
Yeah.
So she created this show that was about soothing them and showing them that they had, that they could sort of, find rest. And it's a pretty, and for that reason, just my final thought on it, kind of an amazing state of affairs. And she says, and maybe there's information that's come along since then, but she insists that there's very little likelihood it would be picked up in the United States, just because of the curriculum, which is hard to pin down. I mean, it's not about literacy or math skills or
social
intelligence.
skills.
Right. It's kind of in a different vein, but it's a gorgeous show.
Yeah, it's a fantastic show. And to touch on the toy part of your prior response, you dedicate a chapter to kind of the toy side of the business. That oftentimes, as the show is in development, there might very well be a lot of toy product, plush figures, action figures that are already in the works to support the show in a way. That the characters that kids love today become the hit toys of tomorrow. And I was curious, since you had spent time looking at the research that goes into show development, did you see much of that on the toy side?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's been to Toy Fair, and many of us have, you can sort of tell it's a kind of a free-for-all in terms of, you do have the bigger media companies that do pursue a generally much more deliberate and responsible course. I mean, Nickelodeon drummed it into my head that they really do insist on an 18 to 24 month window, that they don't try to jam the products out there quicker than that. Kai-lan, though, a licensing show, just announced a big program for 2009.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, which is interesting. But yeah, you do have a little bit of that sort of Wild West, and this is where Julie Clark, shopped a videotape of Baby Einstein, just went from booth to booth, and finally connected with the people from Right Start, and that's where it all took shape. But yeah, you do have a lot of companies that are sort of looking to do it the other way. I mean, and kind of follow the more accelerated path that you talked about. I mean, what's interesting to me is that in the realm of classic properties, because so much of the value now, whether it's Chronicles of Narnia in movie terms, or Transformers, or then on the TV level, you have these shows that are coming out. Disney has Winnie the Pooh in reference to her through
Evergreen property.
Yeah, Olivia is a classic book property that's Corian is setting up. And those, I think the window is a little shorter, generally speaking, in terms of how quickly they can mobilize toys and merchandise, because there isn't as much downside. The property is very well established. So it's an interesting space. My editor, it's funny, and I'm glad you picked up on that chapter, because I found it to be absolutely crucial to describing the landscape. My editor got to that chapter and she said, it's well done, but do we really need this chapter on toy? I mean, here we are talking about TV shows, and your daughter, and your, the history of kids' TV, and suddenly we've got this chapter on toys. I said, wait a second. This is where these characters live. I mean, they go on to live these full lives in Toys R Us and in all different places. It's true. I mean, and I'm not saying that to be cynical. I mean, my household, we have plenty of that product.
Sure. Well,
and it's something that, if anything, I was sensitized to the care that I think show creators ought to be able to exercise and many of them do, you know, as to the way those characters live on in other forms.
Yeah.
It's a headache to try to get your head around 200 products and beach towels and shower curtains and all the rest of it.
Sure.
But you know, you have to realize that this is where people are going to first learn about these characters a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think you had even quoted Gary Nell as saying that you know, Sesame does what, 40 million a year in toy merchandising, and that goes, at least for the workshop, goes back into supporting the development of new shows. And you know, it makes you wonder how much of the toy business and the dollars going back to networks help fund future development.
Yes, that is the question. I mean, Nickelodeon, I believe, does about $6 billion all in with consumer products. But I mean, many of those properties are, you know, older properties, but it is an enormously successful operation, and their margins are much greater. They're one of the most profitable cable networks, you know, in existence. So one would assume that it gets kind of cycled back through. It's why they're able to have the robust research apparatus. That's certainly true.
I'm gonna. One thing that may not be apparent in this book, although you do talk with a lot of folks that are developing content, you know, for the very young. You know, it may be 6 months old.
Yes.
And obviously, there's a lot of controversy around creating screen content for the youngest of possible viewers. And with kind of the recommendations of the American Association of Pediatrics that children under the age of 2 shouldn't be watching any screen media, between the ages of 2 and 3, very limited amounts of screen media. I was curious when you talk to folks like at Baby First TV or Baby TV or some of the others, did that ever come up?
It absolutely did. I mean, it's interesting because the two companies, Baby TV and Baby First, are pretty well established internationally. In the States, it's been the last year or two that they've been gaining traction. Baby First actually just signed a carriage deal with Time Warner Cable, so they're going to be going that way. So they're finding an audience, and what they explained to me, it's interesting. They're suing each other, which is a whole other story.
Someday they might merge.
And they were started by these Israeli families who know each other, and they kind of started these rival networks. And they're both run by these young couples with newborn kids. It's kind of amazing. When I interviewed the head of Baby First, he actually had a rubber or a plastic bracelet on his wrist, and I said, wait, that's not what I think it is. And he said, oh yeah, I'm going to head back down to Cedars after this interview. I mean, he literally was a brand new dad. And when I confronted him with the question, I mean, I tried to go easy on him a little bit as a fellow parent. I think about those first days.
First child.
I think it was his first child, yeah. So I was asking him about recommendation and the fact that there is this stigma. I think it's fair to call it a stigma. In certain circles, you have to remember it's about concentric circles. I mean, 6% of parents, according to the latest survey by Kaiser, are even aware of that recommendation. So there's this whole other large audience that doesn't know that that recommendation exists. And not that they're trying to just deliberately kind of fly under the radar. But I was asking them about the appropriateness of the content, and they just said that they felt this was meant to be co-viewed, that it was really about the parent interacting with the child. Which is a little dubious because they had put a lot of parenting content. This is an interesting thing I discovered as I researched the schedule, what was on these channels. They had been gradually phasing out the how to diaper a baby, how to swaddle a baby, how to entertain your child on a plane ride or whatever. Like they had a ton of that parenting content, and they had gradually kind of stripped that away because they found the ratings were not there. That baby content is considered expressly for the baby, which is kind of an interesting state of affairs.
Sure.
And they just basically didn't give a lot of credence to the AAP. They just felt like, what did they really know? You know, how did they know this? There's no real kind of smoking gun. So they just, and it's true. There's nothing that's preventing them legally from doing what they're doing.
No, certainly not. But their side of the story is out there, and causing the heat in that early age part of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, they break the shows into, well, this is another interesting aspect, is that they break them into much smaller segments. At least Baby TV does, where they'll have a 4-minute short followed by an 11-minute program followed by, it's not the 22-minute blocks that we're used to.
Was there much conversation either with some of the other folks that you interviewed about co-viewing? I know you touched on Sesame Beginnings on the workshop.
Right.
But how often did co-viewing come up as something that is built into the show?
It's kind of, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's kind of the ne plus ultra. It's like what everybody is sort of idealizing as the environment for a show. And Brown Johnson was saying there's nothing more powerful than actually being able to filter, and I get where she's coming from, to kind of sit there with your child, provided they're of a certain age, let's say 3 or 4, and say, why is he, even if you may not buy into the show, or you might not think it's a really grade A show, you can kind of use it as, to use the overused phrase, a teachable moment, and actually say, why did they describe this like that? Or why is the girl wearing pink and the boy doesn't wear pink? You can get into some interesting issues. But I mean, I would say it is a built-in assumption, especially given the interstitials. If you think about Noggin, and I think many of the other channels are this way, they do offer a handhold for parents about what the show's about, what it's trying to teach. There's clearly marketing and promotional messages about special programming, and the vertical programming, the promotion that they do is clearly aimed at the idea of a parent being in the room. So I feel that the underlying assumption is that co-viewing is happening. I'm certainly the first one to say that it doesn't always happen in my house, and that's always the challenge. The experience of it is very different with a parent versus without.
Yeah. There are parts in your book about creating media for the very young. And oftentimes, in your book and in other books as well, Dan Anderson's name often comes up, a researcher from the University of Massachusetts who's done a lot of eye scanning studies with young children and adults, and making observations. And I think one among many of Dan's claims to fame are how to engage kids in an interactive part where a show may say, "Hi, my name is Scott. What's your name?" That's great. And it almost, a lot of shows, newer shows you see are using this interactive element, and I wonder if that's the new form of feature for all preschool shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Adaptation, but there's a whole bit about screenwriting, and there's a guy named Robert McKee who's a screenwriting guru, and he's sort of tutoring Nicolas Cage's character in how screenplays are constructed. And there's always this second act complication, and then the third act resolution, and you can literally take a stopwatch to a typical Hollywood movie and say, okay, here's the second act, here's the third act. And if you're trained in a certain way, and I confess in terms of movies, I've been sort of, conditioned in a certain way, you really can see the puppet strings. You can see the kind of, the gears grinding, if you will. The best movies, maybe not, but the typical run-of-the-mill fare, you can tell, like, okay, the love interest comes in at 22 minutes into the movie, and you really can diagram it. And I do think in this case there is some application in that sense to the preschool space, where once you know the pause, the Blue's Clues pause, or some of those other features, you really start to see it everywhere. And to some extent that's great. I mean, Disney didn't really have that notion of those kinds of normal features and how to construct a preschool show until people kind of planted those seeds and brought that culture. Every entertainment company has their own culture. You know, that's true of corporate America, but especially in entertainment. What you see at the end of the process is often a product of the culture at that company. And so there have been a couple of these companies that have really made these formal features kind of their claim to fame. And it's kind of actually, in a lot of ways, nice to see it pop up a lot of places. It does get a little repetitious, and sometimes it really strikes you as kind of bizarre, you know, because it's so repetitive and so, you know, it's all about integrating it smoothly into the storytelling.
True. It's really about the child engagement, and parents may find it repetitious and so forth. And
exactly.
And
it's not for the parents.
It's not for the parents,
yeah.
And I think it's it's summed up with a Saturday Night Live skit from TV Funhouse called Maraca, where it goes, "Hi, I'm Maraca. Can you break a 50?" And if you haven't seen it, it's a blast. It's very funny. Well, Dade, thank you very much. For speaking to us all. Can I wrap up by asking, before we take some questions from our audience, how, I know you're a new dad again, and congratulations with your addition to your family. How has writing this book changed your thinking about media and what you allow your children to view or not view?
Yeah, it's the ultimate question. It's what I knew I was going to have to come to by the end of the book, and in terms of making people understand the journey that I went through. And I can say this, I mean, we didn't unplug the TV and sort of throw it out the window. I mean, we didn't go cold turkey, or it wasn't any kind of huge cathartic realization that everything that we did with my daughter needed to be totally, we needed to do a 180. But I will say, 6:15 in the morning used to mean a certain thing the first time around, and I haven't automatically gone to the TV. He's 15 months, my son, and I just feel like there's a lot else that we can offer him, and as tough as those hours are in the morning to fill, and sometimes feel like you're a POW or something. You're just so tired. But that's one big change. Is that I just haven't automatically said, "Oh, what's on TV?" I mean, I definitely have not gotten into any of the videos. So that is a big change. One thing that I will say though, anyone with multiple kids can attest to the fact that there's a lot of spillover. So he'll be wandering around and Margo's watching, something that's way above his level. We try to limit that too, but there's only so much you can do. So.
Well, thank you very much. An enjoyable book, and I appreciate you answering our questions. And I think David Kleeman has some parting words, and then we'll see you all in the next round.
Just a couple things to the question about gender. The theme of Pre-Jeunesse this year was gender and media, and they did studies all around the world. You can find those studies at the Pre-Jeunesse website. I'll make sure to get a link up on our website as well to those studies. Some fascinating stuff. Some of the research, you might question some of the methodologies, but the information that came out is very interesting. I forgot to say in introducing Scott that he's brought a little gift for us. He has done over the past couple weeks face-to-face set of interviews with Peggy Charon. And we've got copies of that outside if you want to hear what she's thinking about where the industry has gone and what the effects have been of the work that she did with Action for Children's Television. Please come to the Center's website, feedback to us, links you'd like us to put up, people you'd like us to be talking to, anything that we can do. I mean, the Center exists to serve you, to make sure that you've got the resources, the motivation, the skills that you need to do your best work. So please come visit us and make suggestions to us. Please come help us eat the food that's there. Please come get Dade to sign a book. The smart author, he travels with a Sharpie. So come and join us and continue the conversation. Thank you.